This is POL242 Odessa 2013, Correlation and Regression Assignment, Assessing Support for Increasing the Government's Ability to Fight Crime. Our research question asks which factors affect Canadian support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. The dataset used was the Canadian Election Study Survey of 2011. In regards to the analytical method, we used an index as the dependent variable and ran a reliability analysis to ensure that the indicators all measured the same concept. The first question used for the index asked respondents to rate how important they felt the crime was as an issue. The second question asked respondents if they agreed that the government should be able to crack down on criminals, even if this meant that ordinary citizens would lose some of their rights. The third question asked respondents if the government should be given greater ability to crack down on suspected terrorists. So our rationale for creating an index is due to the fact that we used public opinion data and our original indicators all had few categories. Our rationale for including respondent support for cracking down on suspected terrorists in our index is rooted in an article written by Michael Lawless, who argues that terrorist acts are criminal acts that should not only be addressed by the international community, but also by national governments themselves. In our reliability analysis for our index-dependent variable, it resulted in an alpha of 0.68, which is above the threshold of 0.60. Which further suggests that these indicators all measure the same concept. We then ran a frequency distribution in the form of a recoded index. 52% of respondents showed moderate support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. This is also reflected in our mean, median, and mode, which are all around 2. Okay. So for our hypothesis and rationale, for 3 independent variables, hypothesis 1 states that educational attainment will affect support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. Rationale for this hypothesis is rooted in the study conducted by Cullen, Jones, and Aneber, who argued that those with higher education will be less likely to support harsher punishments as opposed to solutions concerning rehabilitation of criminals. Hypothesis 2 states attitudes toward racial minorities will affect support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. And rationale for this hypothesis is also rooted in the study conducted by Federico and Holmes, who argue that those with negative attitudes toward racial minorities tend to be more likely to support increasing the government's ability to fight crime. Hypothesis 3 states that political affiliation will affect support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. This is also based in our literature, which suggests that those who identify themselves as conservatives or right-wing will be more likely to support increasing the government's ability to fight crime. Okay, so correlations among support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime in 3 independent variables. The correlation matrix shows that political affiliation has the strongest positive effect on Canadian support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime, which suggests that those who consider themselves to be more right-wing or conservatives will tend to support increasing the government's ability to fight crime. The correlation matrix also shows that educational attainment has the strongest negative effect on Canadian support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. Which suggests that those with higher education tend to be less supportive of increasing the government's ability to fight crime. And as you can see, attitudes toward racial minorities are shown to have the weakest effect. The regression analysis yields similar results, whereby attitudes toward racial minorities holds no clear relationship with Canadian support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. Likewise, results from regression show that political affiliation has a greater impact than education on support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. For summary, in regards to multicollinearity, tolerance levels in regression were far above the 0.20 threshold, which suggests that these indicators were not measuring the same concept. In regards to academic literature, The data in both the correlation and regression analysis supports arguments put forth by Colin Jones and Ever, who argued that those with higher education levels are less likely to support harsher punishments for criminals, as opposed to the solutions which focused on rehabilitation. This suggests that the data from both the regression analysis and correlation analysis support the arguments put forth by Colin Jones and Ever, which suggests that educational attainment affects support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. The data from both the correlation analysis and the regression analysis did not support the arguments put forth by Federico and Holmes, who argued that those with negative attitudes toward racial minorities are more likely to support increasing the government's ability to fight crime. For our third hypothesis, Daniel Mears, the correlation and regression analysis both provide strong support for arguments made by Mears. The data shows a clear relationship between political affiliation and support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. So in conclusion, the results suggest that attitudes toward racial minorities may not have a moderate effect on Canadian support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime. For future considerations and research, the article written by Daniel Mears also examined the effects of marital status on support for increasing the government's ability to fight crime, which may be useful for future assignments.